So for those just joining, please share a little bit in the chat about who you are, where you're coming from, and there's a resource document. We'll be doing, it's a 90-minute webinar, but we'll be saving at least 20 minutes at the end for discussion. And any questions you have along the way, feel free to put those in the chat or come off mute if they're more burning questions. The Co-op Clinic is a program of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. And now, having participated in this webinar, we invite you to do a free 30-minute consultation with us, and where we can find some specific resources for you, and where we can potentially pair you up with one of our peer advisors. So we have a whole network of advisors around the country who have experience as worker owners in a cooperative and are also experts in fields of co-op governance, decision making, onboarding processes, accountability and conflict issues. Some of them are finance whizzes and financial projections and business plan consultants as well. So, feel free to reach out if you're ready with a project for specific technical assistance. So feel free to share in the chat for those just having come in a little bit about yourself. It'd be great to see who's here. All right, so let's start with a little bit about cooperatives in general. When we talk about cooperatives, there's lots of ways of classifying them. This is one way we find it useful to classify cooperatives. Basically how the members relate to the co-op, right? So one common type of cooperative is where people come together as consumers, right? They come together to buy together to get access to goods and services at a better price or more accessible to their community. These are common in the natural food store arena, right? Retail grocery co-ops are often consumer owned. The consumers have pitched in with interest in starting a grocery store that meets their needs as consumers. They're also common in the banking sector, right? So credit unions could be considered, or cooperative banks could be considered consumer cooperatives. The people buying and using the services are the member owners. And there's other purchasing cooperatives as well in lots of other sectors. And then there's producer cooperatives where people have come together to sell and market their goods together, right? So this is common in the agricultural sector, especially where where businesses, right? So dairy farms, cranberry growers, the business has come together with other businesses to market their goods. So Ocean Spray cranberry, Cabot cheese, a lot of these producers come together to have joint processing, better marketing, a common brand sometimes. So those are producer cooperatives. Worker cooperatives are where we're focusing on today, where the workers, the individual member worker owners, are the ones who have initiated and are the owners of the business entity. So in contrast to the cranberry bogs, where every worker who's picking cranberries may not be, an owner, it's the owner of that cranberry bog farm business that is an owner of the cooperative. In a worker cooperative, it's every individual member owner that is an owner of their workplace. So again, we're focusing on worker co-ops. We work closely with other types of cooperatives, and there are plenty of multi-stakeholder, or also called hybrid co-ops, right? Who mix some of these together. Maybe there's a grocery store that is owned jointly by the consumers and the workers, right? And they have shared pre-designated number of seats on the board of that cooperative, for example. So happy to talk more about multi-stakeholder in the future, but again, we're focusing on worker co-ops today. Welcome. For anyone who has just joined, feel free to share a little bit about who you are in the chat, and we have a resource document. You can follow along with lots of links. You can make a copy and do your notes in there. And before we go too much further, I'd love to hear a little bit about what stage you all are at. So I'm launching a poll that just has a quick question. If you're in the idea stage or you're in a startup and you're getting going, making some progress, or if you're exploring the conversion of an existing company into a cooperative or something else. Looks like we have a good mix. Looks like everyone's replied, or not everyone yet. Okay, so a fair number of you are here just with an idea or ready to learn. That's a great place to be. But some of you are already with a startup, and one of you has an existing company. So hopefully this will be useful for all of you, but it really is geared for really early stages. All right. So to talk a little bit about why people start worker co-ops, there's multiple reasons, right? People usually have come together because they want to create good work for themselves and their community. They are interested in fair pay, job security, and a mission, right? A lot of you will be coming to this with a mission-based business idea, and you see how it will benefit your community. It's important that, worker co-ops eventually embody all of these, but you might be stronger in one than others as you get going. And when we talk about worker ownership, we talk about it in two ways primarily, right? The joint ownership. This means people have invested and are involved in the financial benefit, the risk and reward of the cooperative, right? If there are any surplus generated, that's shared back to the members. And then the democratic decision making and democratic control, right? So worker co-ops have both of these components. There are other entities that are very much part of our movement, employee stock ownership plans, that have the joint ownership component, right? They're employee owned, but they don't necessarily have the democratic decision-making power. Most ESOPs aren't fully democratic, for example, but they have the financial benefit. Staff-directed nonprofits are another example of a group that has one of these, but not necessarily both, right? They have the democratic decision-making. Nonprofits that are democratic workplaces are democratically controlled, have participatory decision-making processes, but they don't necessarily have the joint ownership or the financial benefit. And again, a lot of what we talk about here might be beneficial to groups anywhere along the spectrum or with different components, but worker ownership and worker cooperatives have both of these components. I'm happy to go more into nonprofit structures later if that's of interest. For someone who just joined, we have a resource document you can follow along with, get all the links. Now to share a little bit about the worker co-op movement in the US generally. It's a small but growing movement, right? There are somewhere between 900 and 1100 worker co-ops in the US. It depends if you count the ones in very early stages. We've been able to confirm 612 in our last census. To give you a sense, that's a growth from 326 2 years prior. So you see, that the movement is growing, but it's small compared to other sectors, other co-op sectors and other worker co-op sectors in other countries. So, but the movement is also very dedicated to, two values that I'll be getting into. And this represents somewhere between 8 and 12,000 workers throughout the US. And in our membership of the US Federation, we have over 300 members that are active and involved in decision making. And to just share a little bit about the racial demographics of the worker co-op movement, We're still seeing a majority of people of color with a concentration in Latinx communities. Immigrant worker co-ops are for sure on the rise. Um, we have a perception of co-ops sometimes that is the 70s white hippie kind of movement. Um, but the reality is a little bit different, right? There's concentration in urban areas and in immigrant communities, and the um, African American co-ops have a long history in the U.S. There's a well-documented history and current, movement of Black-led co-ops, and this is a great resource. Highly recommend this book by Jessica Gordon Emhard, Collective Courage. There's a link in the resource document to that. And when we talk about cooperatives in general, these are all, the multiple kinds of co-ops we've been talking about, all internationally adhere to these 7 co-op principles. Voluntary and open membership, principle 1, doesn't mean you have to let anyone into your co-op at any time with or without qualifications. It does mean in a worker co-op that you are practicing anti-oppression in your membership procedures, in your hiring procedures, in the way that people find out about membership and have the opportunity to apply for membership, right? You can have employees that are not members, but there should be a fair way and an open way for people to access that membership. Principle 2 is around democratic member control. We've talked a little bit about that. This at the baseline is that members are making the major decisions in the cooperative, whether that's a simple majority vote, a super majority vote, a consensus decision-making model, other types of decision-making, whether they're electing a board of directors that make a lot of the day-to-day or strategic decisions. But there's some route to make to be involved in the governance of the cooperative. So at the baseline, if you do have a board, you have the ability to run for the board as a member and to vote for the board of directors. And then the board of directors often oversees the management of the cooperative if you have that structure. If you have a more horizontal structure, then democratic member control may look like consensus process, collective decision making, and many different layers, team-based decision making, lots of things like that. So that's democratic member control, and it's a practice. It's an ongoing process that every co-op is dealing with and improving upon regularly. Member economic participation is about that risk and reward component we also discussed, right? So there's usually some sort of buy-in to your cooperative. You don't want it to be preventative, prohibitive to the kind of members you want to involve, but you do want to be a significant, investment into the cooperative. And it could be a route for generating capital needed to get the co-op going or to grow. And from that investment and the involvement, there is the understanding of reward as well. So any surplus generated returns to the members in the form of patronage, which we'll be talking about more. So member economic participation is key. Principle 4, autonomy and independence. This is about you as an entity, as a cooperative, not being beholden to another entity or organization or individual, right? You're not a subsidiary of a larger corporation. You're not giving away all of your voting shares to investors or another organization. You can be closely affiliated with other organizations that are supporting you. You can be franchised with other cooperatives. You can be federated, closely federated with other organizations. You can be the parent organization of other organizations as a cooperative, but you can't be beholden to someone else. You need your autonomy and independence as a cooperative. Education, training, and information is an active principle 5, is an active thing in cooperatives. It's not just, yeah, people, if they really dig and really fight for it, they can get access to information. No, it has to be a participatory thing where there's regular sharing and training and leadership development in cooperatives to really be able to practice principle 2 and flex that muscle of democratic member control. Education is key. Principle 6, cooperation among cooperatives. This looks like lots of different things in different places. I was inspired, 20 years ago in Argentina, people were coming out of this economic crisis and organizing the recovery of these factories that were on the edge of shutting down. The workers took them over, they occupied, they took to the streets, they ran. So the tile factory Sanon was producing the tiles for a lot of different co-ops in Argentina. They sent them up to this 4-star hotel in the capital, Bauen, where they were providing, running this 4-star hotel. The workers were the ones making all the major decisions, no longer this big management ownership structure. They provided all of this space for the National Congress of Recovered Factories and Worker Cooperatives. They provided a sales space for an Adidas factory that was taken over by the workers and selling their shoes. They were all coordinating around childcare services and joining each other in the street when they were working on the expropriation of the factory assets, the legal, ownership back to the workers. So they were all, this kind of collaboration and cooperation among cooperatives was so strong in that post-economic crisis time, but continues, in their federations and things like that. In Maine, there's a conference specifically called Principle 6, P6 for short, such a key principle around co-ops coming together, in lots of different industries and sectors. And we see it in supply chains as well, right? Where co-ops are purchasing from other co-ops who are working with other types of marketing cooperatives and things like that. So Principle 6 is a key one. Folks who just joined, we have a resource document you can click along the links that are in there, make a copy for yourself for a notes document, however you want to use it. And again, if there are questions at any point, feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute. We also have time at the end for discussion. Principle 7 is really about a commitment to your mission and instead of doing harm like many corporations do to the community, being a benefit and adding something positive to the community. This could look like a commitment to anti-gentrification work or housing justice in your neighborhood. It could look like deep environmental and green practices in how you run your business and do your purchasing, etc. It could be a commitment to environmental justice and pollutants in your area. It could be lots of different things, but it could be just doing the mission component of your business really well in a way that is really impacting the community. Just being a worker cooperative and having ownership opportunities for the community is already enacting this principle, right? Instead of a few people owning the co-op, you're building wealth more generally in the cooperative, and that's a contribution to the community. If you're converting an existing company, that decision to share the ownership is a real gift to the community. And related to this, related to this are the aims of worker cooperatives around democracy, right? This is the shared decisions, the prosperity, the shared wealth component I just talked about, and then community, and really about sharing your vision, right? Worker cooperatives need to have input from multiple founders and multiple early member owners, right? It's not just one person's vision and other people are workers in it with just the financial participation. It's really around the vision, direction, governance that is shared as well. Worker co-op should have all 3 of these at some point, really involved. You could be stronger than one as you get going, but another way to kind of discuss this is like a successful worker co-op. The members are organized democratically. They run a profitable business, right? You're a sustainable business, and you benefit the community. There's a cooperative called Anti-Oppression and Resource Training Alliance, AORTA, aorta.coop. I'm sure their resources are in that resource doc, because they're creating so many things. So starting from benefit from the community, they provide all sorts of amazing facilitation and resources around anti-oppression work, right? In facilitation and conflict and in how organizations, make the shift from white leadership to multiracial or Black-led leadership and all of that kind of work. They are providing a lot of resource to the community around that. And they run a profitable business, right? Their consulting-based business is enabling people to really have stable, good living wages and incomes from their member participation in that cooperative. And they run it democratically, right? They make the major decisions together. They do regular meetings and participatory processes for people to be involved in the major decisions. So aorta is a great example of, and there's so many that embody all three of these components. When we talk about a conversion in this context, we're talking about a business that is already existing and that is looking to convert to a cooperative, right? And this process is one that can have deep impacts on how the business runs, or it can just have deep impacts on how the business is governed and owned, right? But either way, it's often a messy, emergent, and really deep process that and a natural process in some ways. As you go from a caterpillar to something beautiful, right? That could really enable full racial justice or gender justice or things like that. As you go through this transformation, you can take those on, or just the fact that multiple people are now owning the business and making the major decisions in the business, can have a real lasting impact, while at the same time preserving the aspects of the culture and mission that original founders want to preserve. So we see this in a few different ways. Owners are staying in, and they want to share ownership. They want to grow but not be the only owner. Or someone's retiring and they want the conversion as a succession strategy, or somewhere in between. Someone's staying in, but eventually they want to exit, and they see this as a way to preserve that culture, to get some potential tax benefits and compensation for all the risk that they've taken in starting the business. And they want it to grow as a community resource. There's a lot of great resources, stories and toolkits and things at becomingemployeeowned.org. If you're in this, or you in this process, or know someone who's interested in converting a business to a cooperative, there's lots of great partners in our workers to owners collaborative that are ready to support that transformation. And if you're here with that hat, a lot of what I'm talking about will be relevant, even though this, we're geared at startups today. So the rest of this webinar, we're going to be going through the different steps, and here's a way we are offering as a way to categorize this work, right? To kind of organize this work as you get going. The co-op capacity work, which is culture, framework, internal work, business development around entrepreneurship and some legal work, and then ecosystem, which is really the connecting, the outer connecting work. So we offer this up as a way to organize it all, and we'll be going through all the different steps. You can start thinking about where you may lie and your strengths may lie in this categorization, and where you might need other team members to step up. This first arena, co-op capacity, around shared vision, membership, delegation of work, and accountability. I'll be going through each of these components that are key. Around the shared vision, actually, before we dive into this, let's hear from you all again, where you're at with building your team. Is it just you? Are there a couple of you, but you're looking to grow? You already have a good sized team. Where are you at? Okay. A lot of folks with a team already. That's excellent. Great. So we have a mix, but lots of you already have a team. So as we go through this, you can think, okay, who in the team might be strong in this area if you find this useful. Um, and if you're early on or there's just a couple of you, you can be intentional about growing your team to fill the skills and experience you'll need to do all of this work. So the shared vision component is one of the most challenging. I was a documentary filmmaker, just me and my brother occasionally, and we, I met up with other people interested in media work in general in Worcester. And the process of going from, kind of my vision for a documentary co-op to something broader or a little bit more inclusive was a challenging one. And it took a year of multiple meetings and some, outside facilitators. But the end result was much stronger, right? We ended up having a media cooperative that did youth training, that did audiovisual work in addition to documentary and nonprofit, marketing kind of materials, things like that. Another example of a group that did this well is a worker cooperative in Western Massachusetts called Riquezas del Campo. So they came together, Central American folks who had experience with agriculture in their home countries, that were involved in a worker center, right, an immigrant worker center, that were out there fighting for worker justice and against wage theft and things, but they were passionate about growing food. So they came together and started a vegetable farm. And in doing that, they had a whole series of meetings to create that vision together, right? What would that look like? How would they make the decisions together? How would they share in any surplus vegetables for their families as well as surplus profits eventually? So this is there's lots of different ways to do this, but it is important that it's not just one person's lone genius idea and that stays there forever, right? It's about opening up and really hearing what other people's visions are. And you could do a learning group, you could do a book club, right? In Philadelphia, they've done several co-ops have started out of book clubs. But whatever you do, meet regularly with an agenda, start to distribute, this work and have regular discussions about this. And then clarify what it means for membership, right? What are the expectations of membership? How long does someone need to be involved before they're invited to be a full member? What are the rights and responsibilities of membership? What are the contributions to become a full member? What are the time contributions, the money contributions? So we do all sorts of activities around rights and responsibilities for worker co-ops, but generally, you take a topic like financial participation and you think, okay, what are the rights? That you have the right to profit sharing through patronage dividends, which we'll be talking about how that works. But you have the responsibility to pay a fee, right? A membership fee of some sort, to provide your labor on a regular basis, to be involved in budgeting. And when there are losses, you may be responsible for some of those. Education, right? There you have the opportunity and rights around education, but you also have the responsibility to educate yourself, to at some point to step up in leadership roles. And then around governance, you have the right, at least like I mentioned, to vote and run for the board, right? That's a baseline. You may have many more rights depending on your structure. But then you have the responsibility to really be involved, to understand what you're voting for, to really carry out that autogestión, right? The self-management, self-governance work that is really about, balancing your individual needs with the collective interests and figuring out what is really best for the co-op and walking the walk around that democratic decision making. And then information, like I mentioned, you have rights to the bylaws, policies, at least some financials, many co-ops are very open book. There's open book management. You can look that up as a tool, specific tool around sharing financial practices. But then you have the responsibility to be transparent about major decisions and financial components. The second arena is also, I mean, this first area, this internal work is really thinking about the internal delegation of work, right? In early stages, you're having meetings, you're coming up with tasks to move forward, and it's important that one person doesn't just take on everything, right? You're finding real tasks for folks. You're distributing and delegating in an effective and empowering way. Um, you may bump into things that are unfamiliar and challenging, but you're learning together around this, right? Um, and if there's one, concrete thing that I could leave with you today in this stage in the process as you're, with a steering group, early stages group, is that you set up a culture of accountability from early on. That may look like different things in different co-ops with different cultures, but that this is one tool that we've found effective. You give tasks very specific names and due dates, and you keep a good running list of that somewhere, that's easily accessible. If you always meet in the same room, it could be up on a board, but otherwise most co-ops, have a running spreadsheet or tasks in a tool like a project management tool like Asana or something like that. So, but within these, it's really important to not just name the task and let it be, but to say who's doing it and when it needs to be done by. And then have a culture of checking in on the progress of this and holding people accountable to doing the work. When it's done, you celebrate the accomplishments. When they're not accomplished, you check in on why, right? What's going on behind it? Not just, uh, this person is dropping a lot of balls and they shouldn't get more tasks. It's more like, does this person need more information? Do they need reminders? Do they need support in this way? Do they need to do it with someone else the first time? Um, what is really going on behind the drop ball or drop task? So we encourage you to put some system of this into place, even in your earliest meetings. Get something going around accountability. This can really prevent conflict in a lot of ways. Yes, you want to have conflict, be prepared for conflict when it comes up and to be able to move through it in a generative way that hopefully brings you deeper into community and relation with each other and not divide you. But if you do this well around tasks, you may be preventing a lot of miscommunication and resentment that we see in a lot of cooperatives. So let's give a little fictional example here around accountability. The Llama Pepper Co-op was just so eager about growing their peppers and having their llamas, all over their farm that they, had pretty unclear roles. They had a lot of tasks that were just getting dropped in meetings, but they were just like going through it. They had regular meetings, but they were kind of messy and they just, a lot of unclear systems. And after a year of that, people were, getting pretty frustrated, especially the folks who took on more things or, were relying on other people's tasks that weren't getting done. Um, and so they took a step back and said, we need more systems of accountability here. So what did they do? They decided that even though they were a collective, right, they didn't have a hierarchy in their management structure. They decided that they would have work plans and that they would do peer evaluations based on those work plans. So they would set up ways that the people working closely with that person would do some sort of peer evaluation and give them feedback, and that it would be clearly based on the work plan that was collectively approved. They also did the task list that I just explained, and that helped a lot in terms of their day-to-day tasks getting done, especially the tasks that weren't just related to their, programmatic work and the growing and the things on the farm, but all of the other things that go along with getting a cooperative going. And so they also decided they needed a grievance process, right? When harms were happening, they needed a way to be able to bring that up in a way that everyone had some buy-in and agreed to that grievance process. They even needed a suspension and removal process. They knew at some point it may come to that they'd have to suspend and remove a peer, right? Maybe even a friend that's in the cooperative. And so to have clear procedures on that from pretty early on was key for them. They also implemented a mentorship program for new members coming on that could have a mentor or a buddy to familiarize them with all these systems. So after doing a lot of this work, yes, it took a few extra meetings for sure. Took quite a bit of work in between meetings to get these things done. Um, but they were able to have much more effective governance and meetings, and tasks were getting done much more effectively. And then the next year they expanded their farms, grew even more hot peppers, and had even more llamas to spit in their face. So it was a fictional success story. But I have seen co-ops for real, that have dedicated a lot on this be more effective going forward. So this is the first arena, right? These internal team building components, delegation of work, shared vision, membership criteria, accountability practices, right? So if that's you as an initiator, as the organizer kind of person, then here are some, we're offering some tools around that. If you or who in your team is good at the business components, maybe they've started a small business before. Let's actually do a quick poll to see what experience you all have with small business development. Not co-op necessarily, but have you run a small business? Have you done multiple, or you've been involved in small businesses and seen the inner workings, or this is all pretty new to you? All right, so we have a lot of people who have run businesses before. So a lot of these components will come naturally to you. And maybe this second arena is a good place for you to focus your energy around the business development, where we talk about creating value for customers, right? Having solid revenue streams. Creating the right legal form that's a very co-op specific component, but maybe you're already in touch with lawyers, etc. Raising startup capital and your management structure. So, so most of you have some small business experience. A few of you, this is kind of newer too. So I'm going to go over some basic components. But those who have experience, feel free to chime in with other resources or lessons learned through that process, please do. So when we talk about creating value, right, I at least came into, starting a cooperative business as a cooperative mission-based organization, and I didn't see it as much as a business. But creating that sustainable revenue stream is so key to the longevity of your cooperative, right? This is obvious, but it's important to emphasize this, and to really make your business and operations decisions with that customer-centric view, right? What is the really understanding your target customers, right? Where do they get their information? Where might they be making their buying decisions, etc.? What are the key problems that they're facing? What is it in your sector that the good or service that you're providing that is meeting a need, solving a problem that isn't being solved elsewhere, right? Are you more convenient? Are you higher quality? Are you more accessible? Are you in a language that folks are not able to access? And then really defining what your product or service is. Don't try to be everything to everyone as you get started, right? Have a really strong product or service that people will talk about and will refer to their friends, and will come back for repeat use, or etc. So there's lots of great materials. There's a bunch of resources in the resource document about the lean startup model, right? This is where you know get out there and start getting your product or service out there, and you start getting feedback, and then you really develop your full marketing plan. You may need to pivot to really make sure you're meeting the need and have a solid revenue stream, but and survey your potential customers, right? So the second arena is really about engaging around this, setting up marketing strategies. Maybe you don't need tons of advertising dollars. There's lots of marketing strategies. There's a book in there about marketing without advertising, right? There's lots of ways to do it, but that you're making your major business decisions on market research, on feasibility research, not just opinions or gut feelings. I know my community needs this, yes, but what exactly do they need? What are they going to buy? Are you going to have the revenue streams to sustain your business. So you all know this as entrepreneurs already, but I want to emphasize it. And feel free to throw in your experiences in the chat, however, or in discussion time. The startup process, you know, maybe the second arena is really guiding the step-by-step process. And wouldn't it be great if it were this kind of linear, what we think it might be as we get going? We have an idea, we build our team, we finish our business plan, we complete all our governance and policy documents, form a legal entity, we're in operation. It's never that linear. It's more often something like this, right? Where you have your idea, you have a partial business plan, you're building your team, you start your governance documents, you return to your business plan, you are in partial operation, you improve on your marketing plan, you form your legal entity, you raise capital, you finish your policy documents, you're in operation, you have to rebuild your team and return to your business plan, right? And this iteration is okay. The overlapping tasks, can be an okay thing as well. Just know that there's multiple things that will be happening simultaneously, and it's useful to have a team that can track a lot of these different components. Around the legal entity, what we propose around this is to answer some basic questions first, then go to a lawyer and find the right entity. So what are the kinds of things you want to be discussing with your team? How do people become members? What kind of decision-making process are we going to use? What might the cost be to join? Do we want to use a profit-sharing model? Do we expect to have enough surplus and profits to share? Will we need outside investors? Are we likely to have people of mixed status, or is everyone in our co-op going to have the legal right to work in the US? Are there going to be international people that need to be member owners? All of these things have tax and legal implications in how you set up your business. So answer some of those questions as much as you can before you get a huge legal bill. And we have advisors that can walk through the different options and create kind of a lot of these decisions before they're made into full bylaws or operating agreements for your co-op. So I told you I'd tell you a little bit about how the profit sharing and taxation works in a co-op. This is not to get overwhelmed. Accountants will help you set all this up, but just know that this mechanism exists if you are a worker cooperative. So any surplus, that's profit that's generated, net margin profit that's generated by the members. If you have non-members, employees that are working, you have to take that off, and that's taxed at the corporate level, and it can go into the collective account if you're taxed as a corporation. And then, but anything that's surplus, you can divide between a collective account, also called a retained earnings account. That's like for your longevity, for growth, or for reinvesting into things you'll need to grow the co-op. But you can also have these profits shared into member patronage, and that's usually done by hours worked. If someone's working 40 hours a week, someone's working 20 hours a week, the person working 40 hours will get twice as much patronage. That doesn't mean the compensation will change based on these kind of decisions. The bi-weekly payment or monthly disbursement, or however you do your compensation, that can be separate. This is an annual decision usually that is about the profit sharing once you are generating profits. And so you make that first decision. Okay, we want half of it to go into the collective account, say, and half of it to go to the members who made it possible for us to have a good year. And all of that is taxed at the individual level. But you have a second choice point of saying some of that is going to be paid out in cash, at least 20%, so it covers your individual tax burden. But the rest of the 80% or another percentage can go into what's called an individual capital account or an internal capital account. And these capital accounts stay in the cooperative, in the cooperative's bank account, right? But they're tracked as being owed to the members that did the work that year. So when the member leaves or when the co-op is able to pay those out, that goes to the person. And if you already paid the tax on it, then it's free and clear of taxes. Um, and so those can build up over years, right? You can have your initial capital contribution, your membership fee, if you've decided that that's also refundable when the person leaves. And then you build up a notice of allocation. That means this year, you got some in your IOU account, your individual capital account. And then the next year we had another good year. It went up again, and you can build that up. And then the co-op has a year where they pay those down some, or when members leave, they can get paid those out, usually within a certain amount of time, a year, 2 years, 3 years. So, if three people leave at the same time, it doesn't bankrupt the co-op. But know that that mechanism exists, and you're not getting taxed at both the corporate level and the individual level. You're just getting taxed at one of those two components. That's something that's unique to co-ops and is a great tool for, saving for growth, for building a strong balance sheet, right? Your financials that show that you're in a good financial position. Yeah, and it's called Subchapter T with the IRS, right? That's the IRS code to tax co-ops if you are eligible and are doing it this way. And then this second arena is thinking about raising startup capital, right? Maybe you're able to raise all the capital from your member contributions or additional investments that your founding members have. That's great. Most co-ops are looking for some sort of outside startup capital, right? Maybe it's a lender, a term loan that you get from a lender. And the good news is that there are co-op movement lenders that get co-ops, won't require personal guarantees or credit scores, um, will be creative with you, or might not even request collateral. Those are things that you put up in case you can't pay back the loan, so that it's not a total loss for the lender, right? But maybe you can be creative. You have a contract that you can put up as collateral or something like that. So they're going to be more creative than a traditional bank on a lot of these things. And it's going to be less extractive, right? These lenders are not just about getting that interest rate. They're going to have decent market interest rates probably. But if something goes wrong, they're not just going to come in and try to take any assets you have built. They're going to work with you, and probably be more lenient and things like that. So we have a list of just three of the many lenders that get co-ops that are set up to lend to co-ops, and any interest rate you're paying on that is going for their overhead, and so that they can serve co-ops even more in the future. So look those up and check it out. Some of them do equity-like investments too, right? They're not going to take a big ownership stake, but they're going to be very involved and give you, a component that you only have to pay back when you're doing well, right? And then they maybe invest more if you get to a certain stage, things like that. So Seed Commons is a great partner if you're looking for equity-like investment and you're in an area or linked to a specific movement that has a Seed Commons chapter. If you're doing any capital that has outside investors, you can have outside investors as a co-op, but they're traditionally, they're usually non-voting. There are some exceptions. You may have some voting class with limited voting opportunity for investors, but they're generally, not getting a seat on your board, having larger ownership stake as they invest, right? It's one member, one vote. That's a key principle of a cooperative, right? When we talked about democratic member control, one member, one vote, one worker, one vote in a cooperative, a worker co-op. So in outside investors, I mean, many co-ops have raised millions of dollars with patient capital from outside investors. They're saying, when we do well, we'll pay you back. If we can, we'll pay you this target 3-5% interest rate, right? But with any of that, you have to be very careful of securities laws, right? The SEC does not joke around, even with small companies dealing with investments, securities, right? So get a lawyer involved if you're doing any of that. And don't let one person charge it on their credit card with huge, high interest rates, individual power dynamics that arise from that. And then you can get creative, right? You can do crowdfunding, bartering, pre-selling, but whatever you do, try to do it collectively, if possible. Plenty of co-ops have raised millions through direct public offerings and other ways of allowing multiple people, non-accredited investors, to invest in a co-op. And if you get a lender involved, right, shared capital cooperative, co-op fund in the Northeast, Seed Commons, they're going to be able to look at your financial projections. They've seen a lot of co-op structures and governance, business plans, all of that, and they'll give you worthwhile feedback, usually, with no additional cost. So it's a good thing to reach out, even early stages, to one of those lenders. This second arena is also thinking about your governance and management structure, right? You may be forming a cooperative that will go to scale with 50 members, for example, and all of those members are, again, one worker, one vote, one member, one vote, to elect the board of directors. And then the board of directors, the folks here with top hats, are making a lot of the, decisions about the annual budget and strategy and implementation of the broader decisions that they've been empowered to by the membership. Again, they're accountable to that broader membership. And then they oversee management, right? Maybe you have a manager or managers, and that board is overseeing them. And that manager is overseeing the worker owners, right? There's a hiring and firing kind of situation there, but the ultimate accountability does lie with the worker owners here. That's one structure, equal exchange, for example, that does fair trade coffee and other goods, has that structure because they have over 100 worker owners, right? So they elect a board of directors and they have a set of managers, but they have annual meetings where every member owner gets to decide who's going to oversee their boss. So it's an interesting structure, but there's lots of other creative ways to do it too. So you can have everyone who's a member owner on the board, especially if you're going to be 15 people or less, for example. Or you can have, even in a large co-op, a very committee focused or team focused structure. Co-ops are using sociocracy or holocracy in different ways. That's a governance and decision-making process that is linked in the resource document that has more detailed procedures about how to really empower teams, circles, to have a clear scope of work and have real empowerment over that area of work, but also have some coordination and some linking, double linking between those circles to have good communication and overall strategy. So, but you can set it up, and we have guides that can help you through these governance and management structures. So that's the second arena, right? Business development. The third one is around ecosystem development. This is like creating the conditions that you need, right? Working on broader policy things, technical assistance, working with social movements, customer commitments, maybe engaging with the government. And I'll walk through each of those, right? Technical assistance. There's a service provider directory that's mentioned on this slide and is also linked in the resource document, where you can search by state and you can find a technical assistance provider, ideally in your region. Or we also provide that service with our co-op clinic at the US Federation. And you might not find everything from one entity, right? Co-op developers, right? Individuals or organizations that do co-op development are often best at democratic processes and working through those governance questions. But there's a lot of business support services out there. Almost 70% maybe of what you're doing to start up your business is what another small business is doing around their financial projections, their marketing plan, their business model canvases, which is a tool to see all the kind of aspects of your business. All of that can be done with maybe a small business development center, SBDC, in your area. Search that up. Or a small business, maybe the Small Business Administration has some resources, or a business school, or a Center for Women in Enterprise, or other nonprofits that are set up to support entrepreneurs, right? So check out those free resources. Maybe there's an accelerator or an incubator that's in your industry that would be a great resource for you. And then you get the co-op stuff from the co-op experts and developers or one of our advisors. So, but finding what is the right technical assistance is a key component. Don't try to do it all on your own. There's a whole network of support out there. If you have a mission that's explicit, that is linked to a social movement, you can enact that change. That's great. Could be really good for your broader networking and things like that. But it takes effort to sustain that, right? Maybe you are deeply entrenched and have the relationships in a movement, but keeping that in the long run, we've seen as a challenge for a lot of co-ops. So embedding that into your hiring processes um, is key. Making sure you have a core group that really, you know, makes that explicit as a key component. And if you're going to say you're doing all this stuff for a movement, live up to it. Carry out the promises. There's a lot of great examples of groups doing that in the US. Cooperation Jackson, linked to lots of Black liberation organizing that's happened in Jackson, Mississippi for many years. New Era Windows around labor movement and immigrant worker centers. Design Action that does sliding scale for movement, design and web work for movement organizations. Many, many more examples out there. And we have member councils that will help you connect, around these topics, right? We have a Racial and Economic Justice Council. We have a Policy and Advocacy Council. Maybe you don't have great co-op laws in your state and you want a group to help you think through that. We have some resource around that. That's a big part of what we do as a US Federation is advocate and work on policy initiatives. We have Movimientos de Migrantes en Cooperativas if you're a migrant-led group that wants to connect with other Spanish-speaking co-ops, etc. We have that space as well. We have a union co-ops council as well. If you're connected to a union or are considering connecting to a union, why do you need a union if you're worker-owned, right? A lot of people ask that. Well, there can be a lot of benefits for the co-op to do it, right? Unions have resources, they have experience, they may have great grievance procedures. You might get access to a good healthcare policy, etc. Retirement funds, pension funds, and then it's another layer of worker protection, especially if you're going to scale and will have power dynamics in your co-op. There can be some collective bargaining that happens in addition to the regular participation as a member owner. And then if you're involved with a union, an established union in your industry, you can have that organizing power and industry impact. The Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx, New York, for example, is affiliated with SEIU. And they have over 2,000 workers in their co-op, right? So they are unionized to have that worker voice, but also to have impact. And they have had impact in the home care industry, not just in the Bronx, but nationally. So they're a great example of that. And there's great resources. We have this council, right, that has unioncoops.org. We get together regularly with labor leaders and co-op people and trying to bridge this divide. And the Mondragon, one of the the largest worker co-op federated worker co-op in the world in Basque Country, Spain, has partnered up with the steel workers in the US, USW, to do oneworker1vote.org. So there's great resources there too. Co-op Cincy is doing great things in Cincinnati and Co-op Dayton in Dayton, Ohio, in Los Angeles and Springfield, Massachusetts. Lots of other places are doing this really well, and there's great examples out there. So check it out if you haven't thought about involving a union. Maybe it's a good opportunity. You have both your operating agreement or bylaws, and you have your union contract, and they're complementary. It's not like an oppositional kind of relationship. Even in that big home care company cooperative, right? They come together, union reps and managers come together and come up with what's best for the workers. So then this arena is also getting commitment and input from customers, right? Selling coupons, pre-sales, contracts at anchor institutions, right? Maybe there's a nonprofit hospital or university or something like that that is purchasing a lot from your sector, your industry, and can purchase locally, and that can be part of their mission, right? Or a federation of faith-based organizations. So you could go out there and win a contract for the growth of your cooperative. You might engage people with polls, forums, events, social media, etc. Then maybe you want to see if the government has any, your local government or state government have initiatives that can support you as well. Maybe you can become a preferred vendor. Maybe you can go after some workforce development funds, right? Workforce development funds are for creating jobs. What are you doing when you're starting a company? You're creating jobs. They're for training a workforce. What do you need to do when you get going? You need to train your workers. So the deliverables of those grants or those funds are often very much in line. So check those out. We're happy to partner with you if it's a broader project, or we can help you find a partner that might be good to go after those workforce development dollars. And then maybe there's geographic incentives, right? Maybe there's a facade program or a sign program in certain neighborhoods that you're looking at that you want to align with. So check that out. And that is kind of, the work, right? And as you build your team, you might want to think who is strong in one area. You also want to really consider equity from in every aspect as you build your core team, right? Our media cooperative was really, strong on racial and class issues and in our core group, but we weren't great on gender issues, right? We were all cisgen male, all four founding members were cis men, and then bringing in women and gender nonconforming folks later was really challenging. We had to do really intentional culture shifting work to provide that space for full participation. So if we had been more intentional around that equity issue early on, we would have been more effective. So as you're thinking about building your team, keep that in mind, of course. But you may want to think about this way of organizing, where are your strengths, where do you have collective weaknesses and need to learn all together around something, right? Maybe you're the one good at group processes and you want to take on this co-op capacity arena. Maybe someone loves spreadsheets and has started a business, so they're in the second, business development. And maybe that networker, right? That's mobilizing the allies, and they can hold that down. Or you have two people in each of these, if you have a team, a larger team. So, think about the way of organizing it. This is just one more, way to break it down, right? Shared vision, membership, decision making, hiring might fall in that first arena. Business development might have the product, finance, management, legal components, and then community and networking might have the marketing, customer service, suppliers, right? Where's your supply chain and alliances? So we offer that up as a way of organizing it. And we hope this overview has been helpful. We're coming up on the discussion time, so start thinking about your questions or start dropping them in the chat. I just want to share a little bit more about our federation before we do that. I mentioned this earlier, but a few people weren't in. We run a co-op clinic of peer advisors, people that have been worker owners, are worker owners in co-ops, and are also experts in providing technical assistance. We offer a free half-hour intake consultation, and then we get you resources specific to your co-op. And if there's a larger technical assistance project, we try to leverage grants or offer that as a fee for service. You can plug in as a member of our federation to get discounts of that technical assistance, to get access to health related benefits. It's hard as a small business to get good dental and vision plans, et cetera, for your workers. So you can get access to that through us, disability insurance, health insurance in a few limited areas. We're still working on that. Get access to our peer networks and member councils. And then we put on great conferences and events and things like that. So, and then, really engage with policy is another place, and just supporting us, helps us do more of that. We have, lots of partners around the country that you can find. We may have, a local chapter or movement partner in your region that we can connect you with. There's lots of resources for co-ops online. Sustainable Economies Law Center is the go-to place for co-op law stuff. Democracy at Work Institute is our sister organization that has created a great resource library for and a lot of resources for co-ops and democratic workplaces, um, and then we have a lot on our website as well. And if you're not exactly sure what you know need for technical assistance, we have kind of this menu that you can find on our website. You know, thinking about what's a governance package look like, or things like that. How many hours might that be? What do we need to budget? We're happy to customize all of this, of course, but just to get a sense that that's up there at usworker.coop/clinic. And then because there's so many resources and it's hard to know what to focus on, we've made these mini guides. So if you're in the team building phase, you might want to look at the team hiring and onboarding mini guide. If you know you're setting up your systems of accountability and want to figure out how to deal with conflict, we have a guide for that. If you need all this support but don't have any funding for it, there's a guide around getting funding for technical assistance. We have one for founders compensation. We have one for setting your membership fee, financing your cooperative, co-op structure and decision making. And we're coming out with a couple about boards coming up soon. So check those out. Those are all at usworker.coop/clinic/mini-guides. The links in the resource doc. And then we have a grant to support if you're in a rural area that's designated by USDA as rural. We can often cover a lot of this technical assistance or all of it to help you get going. So definitely check us out if you're in a rural area, or in New York City, we have some funds as well, and a few other geographies. And basically, you know, you set up an intake, we do a 30-minute call. As soon as you fill out the form online, you get access to our calendar to book a meeting with us. And then we send you resources. Then we draft a scope if there's a larger project. And then we match you with the right service provider, usually you know, an advisor in our network. And then we might send a payment, or if you're grant covered, we'll just send you an evaluation kind of thing. That's how it works. Happy to answer any questions. We have some upcoming events. We have one for getting your co-op ready for the tax season on January 18th, or just to figure out how does taxation work in a co-op. That's a great place too. And then we have this same webinar, but in Spanish on January 25th. And we run this monthly too, usually on the first Wednesday. We did it on the second because it's January and we need a little time. But usually it's the first Wednesday. So if you have other members that want to participate or know other folks, send them along to this webinar on a regular first Wednesday this time. And then on the 7th, we're doing one specific to LLCs, and it's in Spanish, but there'll be interpretation. So save the date. So this is the resource we're offering. If you liked it, you know, join as a sustainer, you know, stay involved. But I would love to hear questions. I'm happy to go into more about nonprofits, immigrant co-ops, how to build your team, any of that. So feel free to share, come off mute, and share your question, put it in the chat, whatever you'd like. The rest of the time is yours, wherever you'd like to take it. Okay, we have one about taxation. Okay, if you're an S Corp, and that's like a pass-through taxation situation, right? S Corps, you pay taxes individually, right? There's a similar way to do it. You can maintain an S Corp. It is complicated for co-ops, but you can be a partnership if you want to maintain that kind of way of being taxed. You can be an LLC taxed as a partnership where people pay taxes as an individual, right? You take an ownership draw and any profits generated is allocated directly to your share as a member owner, right? So you can do it that way, but most co-ops eventually, you know, when they grow, go to some sort of corporate taxation situation, like I mentioned earlier, right? Where some of it is taxed at the corporate level, right? And then some of it's taxed at the individual level for the profit that's allocated to you and things like that. Beyond that, if you have a CPA you're working with, but they don't really get co-ops, we can put you in touch with accountants that really get co-ops, and they can be a resource to your CPA, or you can go directly to one of our, accountants that get co-ops and get the services to set up your taxation right. So I don't know if that answered the question. Yeah, yeah, I don't know um, if there's more I could say about the taxation, or if you have a follow-up, Shamika, around that. But
I
that's
think it's
generally
probably, I think it's probably one of those things like when you know, you know. Like, so you talk to the tax person and they'll kind of tell you, what's going to work best or whatever.
yeah. And if considerations are, do you want to be treated as an employee, right? Or as an owner for taxation purposes? What is your expected revenue going to look like? What kind of expenses might you um, have that? Yeah, and it really is often customized. If you have some of those things in mind and you go to a tax professional to work out the details, they can help you set it up correctly. What other questions do folks have, or directions people want to go with the last bit of time we have? Feel free to come off mute and ask your question, or put it in the chat. People often ask about what is a good sized team, and that's a hard thing to generalize about. But we found that, like, your steering committee, your group, your core group as you get going, somewhere like 3 to 7 people is ideal. 5 we've seen be really effective. Some co-ops start with 1 or 2 people, but may not be recognized as a co-op by a lender or something until you have 3 unrelated people, right? If it's a couple or 2 family members, you really have to get to a certain size before you're really making broader democratic decisions, and be considered a full co-op. But if you're intentional and set up your bylaws the right way, even a couple people can be an effective way to start. um, Generally, over 15 people in your core group, it makes it hard to have meaningful participation of each member. Even above 12, some people say. So a steering committee, again, of that like 3 to 12 range might be ideal. And often your steering committee that's there dedicated building this is your founding board. Not always, but that's a good way to do it. Be your founding board, and then you get ready to do an election of the next board. A timeline, you know, an existing business. So actually, we have quite a bit of data on that, and it does range between 3 months and 2 years. Um, the most common is around a year. The most successful conversions of a business are more closer to that 2 year period, period, so that there's real intention on every step. But it can happen as quickly as 3 months, or I've heard of a couple even quicker than that. But yeah, generally somewhere in that range. It depends on the owner or seller's, timeline often, but it can also depend on how much time people have to invest in the setting up of the new processes. What counts as technical assistance? Yeah. So technical assistance is typically working on some sort of process around your onboarding documents, your bylaws or decision-making processes, on making, setting up your structure or organizational structure chart, on setting up your finances in a co-op specific way. Um, all of that is usually technical assistance, right? You're working with an advisor, maybe a committee of your co-op, or the founding group of 3 to 5 folks that are working on these processes, on documents that put things into place. That's usually technical assistance. We also offer training, right? Maybe you're bringing your whole co-op team into how do finances work in co-ops, or if you're an existing business, what does it mean to convert a business? What are the considerations? We do those trainings as well, and there's of course overlap. But yeah, training, technical assistance, those are some of the terms we're throwing around. Yeah, rural grants, they're available in every state if you're in a rural area, and state and US territory. Um, if you're not in a major metropolitan area, in a city or in an adjacent town to a city, you're likely to be rural. Send us your address, we'll look it up. Um, and or if you're doing a lot of your business in a rural area, you could be counted under that grant as well. And so it covers our advisor that walks through all those components with you, comes up with template conflict mediation processes and works, with you to finalize that document, or goes through all the considerations about decision making while you're choosing your decision making process, etc. Those are technical assistance components that our advisors can help you with, that we offer on a fee for service basis on a sliding scale, but can go down to zero for rural co-ops, New York City co-ops, some black-led co-ops we can do as well. Under some grants, yeah. Any other questions? Did I miss any questions?
Hi, I have
Yeah.
a question.
Go ahead.
So are there, I guess, resources that are specific to, for example, myself and another Black artist, like we are in talks about starting something that is like media and design oriented. We are not in the same physical location, and I feel like a lot of what I've seen, um, it's like things where it's like if you're in California or this state or that state, are there like, for example, funding specific to the fact that we're both Black people or queer people? Are there any things like that available?
Yeah, we're actively writing grants to support emergent cooperatives that are Black-led, queer-led, led by working class folks, all women or non-binary folks, etc. So we're actively writing grants for those. We do have some funding for Black-led co-ops, potentially. And um, in terms of resources specific to like the distributed, we have plenty of examples and template documents that are from co-ops that are distributed geographically. So, we can help you find those. I don't know if there's, a go-to place for that kind of specific resource, but we can help you find those. And that is a question often folks are thinking, like, where do we incorporate if we're in multiple states? And there's no best answer for that, but usually it's like where you have a really solid mailing address and you can get, mail and not have to change, or get a registered agent that the state might require of you if you don't have someone with a physical mailing address you can put on state documents. Maybe you have 2 employees in one state and it's easier to incorporate in that state. Maybe you're doing most of your business in one state. Those are the major reasons. Other reasons could be like there's a better co-op statute in one state than another, right? Colorado, for example, has a lot of great co-op statutes. Illinois, folks in Chicago have been building a great limited worker cooperative association statute that is great and flexible for worker co-ops. You could go to a state for that statute. It's usually best to prioritize the other reasons I gave first. But some states have more favorable co-op laws, and you may want to choose that over another if you have a member in Colorado and then a member in Arkansas. The one in Colorado might be the right choice because there's a co-op statute there, not in Arkansas. There are favorable ones in most of the western states, and Pacific Northwest. Massachusetts has a good one. Vermont has a good worker co-op statute. A lot of other places have good statutes. So yeah, those are all considerations.
Thank you.
Yeah. How else can I help? Last few minutes. Feel free to throw out questions that are specific to you. at this point as well. To field anything. Does anyone have any resources they want to share about building the team, right? I saw there are some folks that are pretty early stages about building team. And I'm always eager to hear, like, how are you doing that? How are you going and connecting to folks, right? Especially in pandemic times where in-person events are less frequent. How are you connecting with like-minded folks that want to join your core team? And when you do find those people, how do you make sure that they have a commitment to really follow through? Their funding to childcare and education, I'm not exactly sure. Usually, and this is an arena we could go into, if your mission of your co-op has an educational component or a charitable component, you may want to partner with a 501c3 nonprofit, right, and get grants for starting up. You could have a memorandum of understanding with that nonprofit to get the grants. They may take a little percentage, but provide it for you for all your startup costs, etc. I don't know of any specific of there. I mean, childcare. There are enough childcare co-ops that there should be some resources out there that we can connect you to. There are a few school co-op schools and other education initiatives we could connect you to, and there are other industries that we're happy to like connect you with. If you're farm or service, like health related benefit, health related. I think there was someone, working with health providers. We can connect you with those other folks that have, thought about this for your specific industry. But definitely childcare, there are some great examples out there. Funding for them, again, that's more like if you're providing specific services that is charitable and you can get a grant to cover that, maybe you can do that to cover a lot of your startup costs. There's always a question there, like, do you want to be a nonprofit and be a democratic nonprofit? Or is it enough to partner with a nonprofit? Because once you become a nonprofit, you give up the right to be really member governed, fully member governed, and to distribute profits to the worker owners. Other questions? Or again, suggestions around team building or connecting with others?
So I was just gonna say, for me, the business that I'm in is actually, I'm a private car rental company, right? So it's just interesting to me. I got interested in co-ops when I had spoken to someone in my area about, just kind of what it meant as far as, employees having the ability to be members and different things like that. But for me, it's just kind of interesting, trying to wrap my brain around, is this really something that makes sense, right? For car rentals. And so I think that's what I'm kind of grappling with as I, went through this training. I think it's a great concept. I think it's really great. The way that I actually approach car rentals is more people centered. I do away with a lot of different things that have to do with like, deposits and stuff like that, to where it makes it easier for lower income people to have access to my vehicles to do what it is they need to do. I'm not requiring credit cards. They can put debit cards and prepaid cards and different things like that, so they can use those kind of things. But for me, it's just kind of like, I think, being an LLC, having my, articles of organization, already having like these very, set things. It's kind of like, how do you, like when we're talking about bylaws and we're talking about, all that kind of stuff, it's like, I'm kind of grappling with, does it make sense?
Yeah, and maybe you will be the first car rental worker cooperative. But there's other, similar businesses where people have invested quite a bit, right? In not just financially, but into building that culture, building that. And you want to make sure that that is compensated, recognized, distributed in a fair way. And so, our advisors can really help you think through that kind of compensation or transition period that it might take, quite a bit of time, right? To go from one owner to multiple owners, and rewrite your operating agreement as bylaws are called for LLCs, and do like a sale, even if it's maintaining the legal entity. There should be some sort of like time where this is okay. This is the time that it's shifting. And yeah, so we'd be happy to talk more about what that might look like for you. But I think even startup people are, should be considering what should founder compensation look like, right? Um, if for nothing else, for the power dynamics that it creates, if an uncompensated founder just goes forward like all other members without any intention around it, there's unspoken power dynamics that creates. But there's also a justice kind of component. Like if people have risked more or put more investment in, there should be compensation for that. So we have some strategies we can help you think about, for setting up that compensation or recognition or things like that can help around those founders issues. And it's good to think about that early on. If you're in a startup phase, just be at least tracking the hours you're putting in, right? Or making an estimate of what it takes to these uncompensated or undercompensated hours you're putting in, for leveling the playing field in the future for all member owners. Well, that's our time. Thank you so much for participating. We will be sending out resources, but most of it's in that resource document. We hope you take that with you and reach out when you're ready for a one-on-one consultation. And good luck with all of your exciting projects. Have a good rest of your day.